Imagine that you're building a software system that collects healthcare data and financial information from its users. It might seem obvious that this personal information should be protected from prying eyes through access control mechanisms, audit trails, transaction controls, transmission encryption, and so on. In fact, perhaps so obvious that in many cases people perform only a cursory security analysis and produce rather generic security requirements. But is this the right way to build secure software? Are security requirements so similar across projects that we simply don't need to invest the time to explore product-level needs or to document requirements at an individual level for each project? Can we instead rely on business as usual, organizational security practices implemented at the networking and programming levels? In my experience, many requirement specs include a lone security requirement or user story saying something to the effect of, only authorized users shall access personal healthcare information, or if we're even luckier, an audit log must be maintained of every access to the patient's healthcare information. I'm sure everybody has seen those kinds of requirement specifications and the scarce representation of security concerns contained in them. Unfortunately, skimping on security analysis can be quite risky. Perhaps one of the most important questions we should ask is whether specifying security requirements at the individual product level actually leads to more secure systems. We could also ask if the benefits of writing better security requirements outweigh its costs. Drawing an analogy from a related field, it's well known that credit card companies, while excellent at detecting fraud and inactivating stolen cards, almost never attempt to track down the actual offenders and prosecute them. Apparently, the cost of bringing them to justice outweighs the benefits, even though such offenders almost definitely pose ongoing security risks. We clearly need to make informed decisions about how much time and effort to invest in analyzing security needs and specifying product-level security requirements. Performing a rigorous security analysis for a small and unimportant application residing behind an organizational firewall probably doesn't make sense. Similarly, if an organization builds families of web-based educational tests day in and day out, then it can likely build the next solution by reusing existing security knowledge. For example, it could simply review existing security requirements, ensure they're suited for the new system, make any necessary customizations, and then reuse them to the fullest extent possible. If, on the other hand, an organization is branching out into a new domain or building a new kind of system, it simply can't afford to shortchange the security analysis and the requirement specification steps. It's important to explore product-level risks and vulnerabilities, to design safeguards and specify them as requirements that are then trackable and testable throughout the entire product lifecycle. I recently discussed some of the shortcomings of the healthcare.gov website, one of which was a failure to secure personal data. David Kennedy, CEO of TrustedSec, reported that his passive reconnaissance of the website allowed him to extract 70,000 personal records without even attempting to hack into the system. This was particularly alarming given that the Data Hub connects to and integrates information from the Internal Revenue Service in the US, the Department of Homeland Security, third-party verification processes, and insurance companies. The system therefore potentially exposes personal information at a scale not previously experienced in the US, and also requires a robust analysis of security needs. Building any such public-facing system, or any system in fact which includes personal information, clearly demands a systematic approach for analyzing security needs and documenting mitigating requirements. There are several techniques that you might consider adopting for such purposes. None of these replace the need for analyzing security at the network and code levels to prevent things such as buffer overflows, SQL injection attacks, and so on. But they can be used to create a mindset of defensive thinking early in the requirement solicitation process. As a general rule of thumb, thinking defensively means that for every new requirement or feature, we need to think about how it could be either intentionally or unintentionally abused. The most obvious technique leverages checklists and regulations. For example, In the US, all systems that involve the use of personal healthcare data are governed by HIPAA, which stands for the Healthcare Information Portability and Accountability Act's technical safeguards. And these safeguards stipulate several security-related requirements, including access control, automated logout, encryption of stored and transmitted data, and audit logs. Similarly, checklists can be very useful for ensuring that common security issues have been considered. On the other hand, neither of these approaches helps us to think about security risks that might be unique to our application, which means that on their own they're insufficient. 3 techniques are particularly useful for reasoning about and defending against our adversary, the malicious user. The first technique uses persona non grata and builds on the notion of designing for archetypical users to help us think strategically about the kinds of mischief a malicious user might attempt. In my column, I provide an example of Hugh, a young man who intends to attack our system. I've kept Hugh's goals quite generic, but we could create a persona non grata with more specific attack strategies to expose vulnerability points of the product. For example, Hugh just simply says, "I need the system to be developed without rigorous security analysis. I will find a way in." Or, "It would be really fun if the developers don't program defensively against clickjackers or SQL injection attacks." And finally, decentralize the authentication process. That way I can even create my own fake site to lure personal information from people. Creating such personas helps us to take a much more systematic approach to addressing security concerns throughout the project. A related technique involves misuse cases, which can be used to determine in advance how the software product should respond to unintended, perhaps malicious users. Again, I provide a simple example of a misuse case. In this misuse case, we see 2 intended actors, an insurance seeker and an insurance provider, along with their related use cases for managing personal data and for seeking or providing insurance quotes. We can also see the security-related use cases that extend the primary use cases to achieve access control, privacy, integrity, and auditing goals. The diagram also includes 2 different types of malicious users: the cracker, who attempts to obtain private information for purposes such as identification theft, and the fraudulent insuree. The second actor isn't necessarily technically savvy, but nevertheless intends to trick the system into providing insurance coverage that he's not actually eligible for. While I don't have much space to explore these ideas in greater depth in my column, this example does illustrate how misuse cases can focus attention on different kinds of abuses and help us to explore each of these in depth. Misuse cases then help us to determine a suitable set of mitigating requirements and ultimately to design cost-effective countermeasures into the system. Finally, I provide an example of an annotated activity diagram. The diagram is annotated with security concerns of privacy, non-repudiation, and audit. As you know, an activity diagram basically shows the flow of different activities in order to accomplish some goal. In this particular example, an insurance seeker signs up with the insurance broker collects personal healthcare and financial information, identifies potential providers, who in turn generate quotes which are returned to the insurance seeker. The insurance seeker then has to select a plan, register for that plan, and the selected provider has to establish a healthcare record. We can then annotate various activities in the diagram with privacy, non-repudiation, or audit concerns. For example, anywhere that personal healthcare or financial information is transmitted from one site to another, we annotate with a privacy concern. These 3 simple modeling techniques, the use of persona non grata, misuse cases, or security annotated activity diagrams, can help you think more defensively during the requirement solicitation and analysis phases of a project. Instead of focusing solely on the system's intended users, you can also take into consideration their counterparts, who either intentionally or accidentally might undermine your system's integrity. Perhaps it's time for you to think about how well you know your persona non grata.